Imagine waking up in a luxurious mansion, convinced that everything is under control. But then, walking into the kitchen, you find your 9-year-old daughter tending to an injured housemaid, and from her lips comes a secret so heavy, even her mother would never dare to speak it. In that moment, Richard Hall understood. True danger wasn't outside. It was a silence hiding within his own home. Whispers, glances, forgotten memories, slowly weaving together. What seemed like a simple accident revealed something far greater, something echoing through generations. Tonight, you'll uncover the story of Richard, Emily, and Grace. A story of silence, pain, and revelations where every unspoken word holds the power to change a destiny forever. Get ready, because this was only the first night when truth began to surface. The sun had barely touched the gardens of Greenwich when Richard Hall stepped into the kitchen of his mansion. All he wanted was his strong black coffee before the first meeting of the day. But on that morning, time stood still. The sun had barely touched the gardens of Greenwich when Richard Hall stepped into the kitchen of his mansion. All he wanted was his strong black coffee before the first meeting of the day. But on that morning, time stood still. Richard tried to speak, but his daughter gave him no chance. Her tearful eyes met his with strange, unshakable firmness. "She can't say it, but I saw it. It wasn't an accident." Those words sliced through the air like an invisible blade. Grace lowered her head, unable to deny or confirm, and for the first time in a long while, the millionaire felt fear. Richard took a step forward, but Emily placed herself between him and the nanny, small, yet determined like a human shield. It was as if she wanted to protect Grace, or perhaps protect herself. The mansion, once so imposing, now seemed complicit in a secret. Ancient portraits watched them from the walls, and the corridors echoed with an unsettling emptiness. Grace tried to speak, but Emily squeezed her hand. "If I tell you, Dad, you'll be mad at me too." Richard's breath faltered. What could be so serious that it frightened his daughter this much? What was happening in that house when he wasn't there? At that moment, Richard realized something devastating. He, a man used to controlling empires, had no idea what was happening inside his own home. And sometimes, silence can hide far more than words. It can hide presences. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Sitting at her desk, the girl scribbled with trembling hands. The pages filled with dark figures, endless hallways, and a woman in a white dress. But before she could finish the drawing, the lamp's light flickered. The door creaked open on its own. Emily hurriedly covered the paper, as if afraid someone might see it. Ambient sound, the lamp crackling, the child's breath quickening. Downstairs, Richard tried to convince himself that nothing was serious. But his mind kept returning to Grace's bruise and to his daughter's words. He sought out Margaret, the housekeeper. "Grace fell, sir. She's far too fragile for this kind of work. And Emily, well, she lives in her imagination." Her tone was firm, almost rehearsed. But there was something in Margaret's eyes, something cold, as if she knew more than she was willing to say. Meanwhile, Emily remained awake. She held Grace's hand, who was still in pain. "Don't let her come in again," the girl whispered in the dark. Grace frowned. "Who, Emily?" But no answer came, only the sound of the wind pressing against the closed window. The next day, Richard ordered a full review of the security system. New cameras were installed in every hallway. At 3 a.m, one of them froze for 2 seconds. When it came back on, it showed a silhouette standing in front of Emily's bedroom door. Richard rushed up the stairs, but he found only silence. Emily was sleeping peacefully. The hallway, empty, only the mirror on the wall reflected something strange. A white blur, as if a shadow had been trapped in the glass. The next morning, Emily came down for breakfast without saying a word. When Richard tried to approach her, she dropped the bread on her plate and whispered. She said, "You'll never believe me." The billionaire felt his stomach twist. He didn't know if it was just a child's imagination or the beginning of something he could never control. The mansion felt more alive with each passing day, but not with human life. Richard wanted answers, and he would only find them by opening the doors he had kept shut since his wife's death. For the first time in years, Richard turned the key to the door he had kept locked since the death of Elizabeth, his wife. The room seemed untouched. A faint trace of her perfume still lingered in the air, as if she had left only minutes ago. In the corner, a mirror covered by a white sheet, cracked from top to bottom. When he opened the drawer of the vanity, Richard found a worn-out notebook, Elizabeth's diary. In the first pages, there were ordinary accounts of travels, motherhood, the fears of a young mother. But soon, the writings grew heavier. I dreamed that a woman in white was sitting beside Emily's bed. She had no face. She smiled before I woke up. Richard flipped through the pages in a rush. The same symbol appeared over and over between the lines. A circle with 3 dots in the center. In the first pages, there were ordinary accounts of travels, motherhood, the fears of a young mother. But soon, the writings grew darker. I dreamed that a woman in white was sitting beside Emily's bed. She had no face. She smiled before I woke up. Hours later, at dinner, Emily refused to eat. She only looked at her father and whispered, "She spoke to me last night." Richard swallowed hard. "Who, sweetheart?" "The woman in white. She said you never look. You never listen." The silence was more frightening than any scream. Later, Grace found the courage to open up to Richard. Her voice was trembling. "When I was a child, I also heard voices at the boarding school where I studied. At night, a woman in white would walk between the beds. I thought it was my imagination. Now, I'm not so sure." Richard stared at her in shock. The same description, the same figure. Grace's past was now echoing inside the Hall mansion. Back in his office, Richard spread his wife's diaries across the desk. Each page was a cry for help never heard, each word a muffled scream. But the sentence that froze him was written in red, almost tearing through the paper. "If Emily starts drawing what I dreamed, it means the cycle has begun again." The next morning, Richard found a new drawing on his daughter's desk. The woman in white, standing in front of his own bedroom. It was no longer possible to deny it. The presence haunting Emily was not a child imagination. It was the same nightmare that had tormented his wife before she died. And to understand the present, Richard would have to face the shadows of the past. The next step led to Santa Lucia boarding school. The next morning dawned gray, the kind of sky that carried weight rather than light. Richard Hall gripped the steering wheel of his black Mercedes as it rolled down the nearly deserted highway. Grace sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Neither had spoken much since they left Greenwich. Emily had been left under the care of a trusted nurse. She had resisted, clinging to her father's sleeve, whispering words that unsettled him. "If you find her, don't look into her eyes." Her words replayed in his mind like a broken record. The car sliced through miles of forest. The trees loomed on both sides of the road, their branches like skeletal fingers scratching against the gray sky. Fog clung to the asphalt, swallowing the world in a blanket of silence. Richard pressed the accelerator slightly harder, eager to outrun the oppressive quiet. Grace finally spoke, her voice soft but heavy. "You know, Richard, going back there may not give us peace. It may do the opposite." Richard's eyes stayed fixed on the road. "I don't need peace, Grace. I need answers." The words hung in the air, brittle and sharp. After 4 hours, the road narrowed and a rusted iron gate came into view. Twisted by time, it bore a weathered sign, Santa Lucia Academy for Girls. The gate stood slightly ajar, as though time itself had forgotten to lock them. Beyond lay the carcass of a building. Red brick walls stained with moss, windows shattered, ivy curling across the stone like veins. Richard parked. The engine died, leaving only the sigh of wind moving through broken glass. For a long moment, neither moved. Finally, Grace stepped out first, pulling her coat tighter. Her breath clouded in the cold air. "It hasn't changed," she whispered. "Not at all." Her words sent a chill down Richard's spine. Together they pushed open the gate. The hinges screamed in protest, echoing across the empty grounds like the cry of something long dead. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds. Rusted swings creaked faintly in the breeze. A cracked statue of St. Lucy, her face eroded beyond recognition, stood watching as they entered. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Their footsteps echoed too loudly, swallowed by walls that seemed eager to hold sound hostage. They passed long corridors lined with dormitory doors. Many hung open, revealing abandoned beds with rusted frames. Faded posters of saints curled off the walls. Shoes still sat neatly beneath some beds, as if waiting for owners who never returned. Grace's hand trembled as she brushed her fingers against the peeling paint of one door. "I slept here," third bed by the window. Richard studied her face. She looked younger at that moment, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. They pressed deeper into the building until they reached a heavy wooden door marked Archives. Richard pushed it open. The archive room smelled of mildew and old paper. Towers of filed boxes leaned precariously against the walls. Dust motes drifted in the faint light, leaking through cracked shutters. Richard pulled out a box marked 1998. His hands shook as he opened it, papers crumbling at his touch. Inside lay student records, disciplinary reports, and medical notes. He flipped through quickly, searching for one name, Elizabeth Hall. There was his wife's maiden name scrawled across a manila folder. He opened it, scanning pages filled with teacher remarks, daydreams during class, reports of hearing voices at night, claims of seeing a woman in white standing beside her bed, recommendation, psychiatric evaluation. A note at the bottom chilled him. Parents refuse intervention. Case closed. Richard's throat tightened. He had always believed Elizabeth's silences, her sudden withdrawals, were part of her delicate nature. But now he saw them for what they were, echoes of something darker, something inherited. Grace, meanwhile, dug through another box. She gasped softly, pulling free a brittle photograph. It was a class picture. 24 girls in uniform, arranged in neat rows in front of the school chapel. But one figure stood apart, almost at the edge of the frame. A girl with long dark hair and hollow eyes. Her smile was faint, strained, as if she knew she didn't belong. Grace flipped the photograph over. Faded ink scrawled a sentence. "She chooses the loneliest." Her voice trembled. "I know this face." Richard leaned closer. "Who is she?" "Isabella Courts. She was a year above me. Quiet, always alone. Then one night, she vanished. They told us she ran away. But she didn't. She couldn't have. She had no one, nowhere to go." Her words dissolved into a whisper. "Richard, Isabella was family. Distant, yes, but her blood runs in mine." Richard staggered back, clutching the edge of a file cabinet. The weight of revelation pressed down like stone. Elizabeth, his wife. Grace, his housekeeper. Emily, his daughter. All tied by bloodlines and silence to the same haunting legacy. Before Richard could respond, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. The sound shattered the heavy quiet of the archive. It was a nurse. Her voice came through ragged, breathless. "Mr. Hall, you need to come back. Emily, she's burning with fever. She keeps drawing." Static cut the line, then the woman's voice returned, shaking. "You have to see this." She sent a photo. Richard's hands trembled as he opened it. The drawing showed the outline of a figure, in white, standing at the door of Emily's bedroom. Above, in uneven letters, Emily had written, "She already knows you're here." The phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the dusty floor. Grace picked it up, her face drained of color. The silence of the archive pressed in tighter, as though the walls themselves were listening. Richard sank into a broken chair, burying his face in his hands. His voice was muffled, desperate. "It's not just Elizabeth, not just Isabella. It's Emily now." The cycle didn't end. It never ends. Grace knelt beside him, gripping the photograph of Isabella so tightly her knuckles whitened. "We can't let Emily carry this alone. If we stay silent, we feed it. If we confess, maybe—" Her words faltered. She didn't finish the thought. Richard lifted his head. His eyes, once sharp and calculating in boardrooms, now burned with raw fear. "Then we'll go back. Tonight, no more silence." The candlelight from his phone cast their shadows long across the archive walls. And in one corner of the room, unseen by them, a faint outline flickered. The faint silhouette of a woman in white, watching. They left the school behind as dusk fell, the gates groaning shut behind them. Neither spoke during the drive back. But Emily's words haunted Richard, louder than the roar of the engine. If you find her, don't look into her eyes. And for the first time, Richard wondered if it was already too late. Night fell on the Hall mansion without ceremony, like a curtain dropping after play no one enjoyed. The sky outside the tall kitchen windows was a dull slate, the color of a bruise. In the living room, Richard moved like a man trying to remember how to live in his own house. He pulled the heavy drapes shut. He clicked off chandeliers and dimmers until only the floor lamps glowed. Then he unplugged those two, one by one, reducing the room to shadows and breath. Grace followed silently, carrying a small box, matches, a single white candle, Elizabeth's journals tied with twine, and a handful of folded letters whose creases were as tired as the house itself. Emily padded behind them in socks, trailing a blanket over her shoulders as if she were trying to keep a small piece of daylight with her. "Here," Richard said, voice low, almost embarrassed by the sound of it. He set a wooden chair at the exact center of the Persian rug. He placed another opposite it, then a third, forming an imperfect triangle. The candle went in the middle, unlit, a small white promise no one could trust. "Sit where you feel safe," he added. Emily chose the chair nearest the window, though the drape was closed. She tucked her feet up and hugged her blanket close. Grace set the journals down on a rug, knelt, and arranged them like relics, careful, reverent. Richard stayed standing a moment longer, hands on the back of his chair, knuckles pale. From somewhere deep in the house, perhaps a shutter, perhaps a pipe, came a hollow tap. Once, then silence. Grace struck a match. The candle breathed into life. Its flame was small, stubborn, the kind that looked fragile until you tried to put it out. She set the matchbox aside, without moving her gaze from the flame. Richard sat. The chair creaked, a sound too loud in all that quiet. Emily's eyes lifted to the candle, then to her father. He swallowed hard. "We're going to try something," he said to his daughter. "We're not calling anyone in. No priests. No experts. It's just us, Emily. If all of this feeds on silence, then we won't be silent anymore. And if it doesn't like that?" Emily asked. "Then we'll have to find somewhere else to live," Grace said, very gently. Another tap from the bones of the house. 2 times this round. The candle flame quivered. Richard leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to go first," he said. "I should have gone first years ago." He kept his eyes on the candle as if he were speaking to it. "Emily, I was not there after your mother died. I was here in the same rooms, but I was not. I hid in meetings, in numbers, in flights I didn't need to take. I thought if I looked directly at pain, it might forget my address." He inhaled shaky. "It didn't. It moved in here. I made a home for it, and I let you try to live in that home alone." Emily's face tightened, the way a face tightens when it hears something it has waited to hear for years and doesn't know how to hold it. "You looked at me and saw a mom," she said softly, not accusatory, only true. "I looked at you and saw what I didn't know how to save," Richard replied. "Which is worse, I think." Somewhere upstairs, a door settled. The house exhaled. The candle leaned toward Emily as if listening. Grace took a letter from the small stack and turned it over in her hands. "I have to say mine out loud," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "Otherwise, it keeps growing inside me." She unfolded the letter. The paper had been written on, then written over, then folded away and carried with her across apartments and jobs and years. She read, "My name is Grace Moreno, and when I was 11, at a boarding school with long halls and small beds, I saw my friend Isabella walk toward in a corridor and never return." She swallowed. "I told no one. I told myself it was a dream, that she chose to run away, that I must have imagined her calling my name. I let everyone call her a runaway, because the word was easier to say than vanished. I carried it. I was a child. But I carried it like a grown-up carries a lockbox." She folded the letter again. "I am sorry, Isabella. I left you alone. I am saying it out loud, so it doesn't keep eating the dark." The floor beneath them creaked, not with the way of a footstep, but as if a beam somewhere had stiffened, relieved the bare truth instead of secrets. The candle's lapping halo grew a fraction, small but noticeable. Emily untucked her legs and put both feet on the rug. "My turn," she said. Her voice trembled and held. "She tells me at night that I'm only sadness, that I make you hurt, Dad, that I ruin your good days because I look like Mom." Her fingers curled around the edges of the chair. She did not cry, and I believed her. I thought if I didn't tell you about the drawings or the whispers, I could keep you safe from them. I thought if I stayed very quiet, the bad would slip past me. It didn't. Richard reached for her hand across the small triangle of space. Emily waited, considering, and then put her hand in his. The contact was a wire sparking to life. "Thank you," he said, "for still being here with me." The candle flared. A draft drifted through the room where there should have been none. Grace glanced at the covered mirror above the mantel. The draped cloth lifted at one corner, then fell back, as if something had breathed on it from the other side.
Before we go on, if this story has already given you chills, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss any of the upcoming chapters, and you'll help keep powerful stories like this one alive.
Emily slid off her chair and knelt near the journals. She flipped until she found a drawing. Elizabeth had sketched it hastily, lines fierce and certain. A circle, 3 points and a triangle inside. Emily touched it lightly. "I've seen this," she whispered. "Not just in my drawings. In the fog on my window. In the reflection of my doorknob at night. Like it's looking back at me from small, round places." Grace leaned in. "What do you think the 3 points are?" Emily's brow furrowed. "I don't know, but when I look at it, I feel watched. Not by one thing, by 3 times the same thing." Richard almost said, "Me, you, and Mom," and then thought, "Me, you, and what I refuse to face." He kept quiet, not to hide, but to listen for which truth might step forward on its own. "I used to see it too," Grace said, voice gone far away. "In the chapel's stained glass when the sun hit it. In the oil on the dormitory floor. I thought I'd invented it because I was scared. But maybe it was invented because we were." 3 soft taps from the far corridor. The house was counting, or agreeing, or offering them a number they were trying not to see. Richard picked up Elizabeth's last letter, dated, sealed, never sent. He broke the seal with a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for years. "If you are reading this, I can carry it all the way across. I need you to know I tried. I need you to know it's not madness. It's not only me. It is what a house can become when the people in it forget how to call each other by their true names. If it comes for Emily, don't give it the quiet. Give it the noise of love. Loudly, again and again, until it can't hear itself think." Richard finished. He closed his eyes. "Elizabeth," he said, speaking into whatever was listening, "I hear you now. I hear you now. I hear you now." The 3rd repetition landed like a stone in a still pond. Ripples ran out through the frame, into the walls, up the stairs. The chandelier above them, though it had been turned off, clicked once as if a switch had been moved somewhere. The candle burned high and steady. The drape at the mirror lifted. This time not from an imagined draft, but from a deliberate gesture. The cloth slid free and slumped to the floor. For one breathless beat, they stared into the exposed mirror. It reflected the room, the chairs, the candle, the trio on the rug, and something else, a brightness around Emily, dim but real, as if someone had painted a line of dawn around her silhouette. "I see it," Grace said, but her voice did not carry fear. It carried recognition. "She's not alone in there." Emily's eyes fluttered. She held herself very still, listened to something no one else could hear. When she spoke, her voice had another tone braided into it, a harmony below the child's treble, older and wearier. "She says," Emily murmured, "that I don't have to be afraid if I stop pretending I am not. She says you thought she was a thief, Dad, stealing me at night, but mostly she was trying to take what you couldn't carry." Richard's breath stuttered. "Who says?" "The one with no face," Emily replied, simply. "But it isn't that she has none. It's that she borrowed everyone else's and forgot which one belonged to her." The candle guttered. The mirror hummed. The triangle on the rug. Father, daughter, witness. Held. Grace reached for the locket at her throat, the one she had begun wearing after their return from Santa Lucia. She opened it and showed Emily the tiny photograph inside. A girl with grave eyes and a mouth trying not to smile. "This is Isabella," Grace said. "I forgot to say your name when I was small. I am saying it now. I am not running down the hall this time." Emily stared at the picture. Then she stood without warning and crossed to the mirror. She raised a locket, holding up the glass, as if offering an old friend a passport home. The mirror's surface quivered, not a trick of the eye but a vibration, like surface tension catching a single raindrop. A draft moved through the room with intention, circling them in a slow, wordless question. "What else?" Richard asked into the space, not sure who he was addressing anymore. "What else do you need to hear?" The answer arrived in the simplest form. Emily's hand reached blindly backward until it found her father's. She didn't look away from the mirror, but her fingers tightened around his, anchoring him to the moment. "Tell me my names," she said. Richard saw suddenly how many names he had given her without speaking them. Burden, shadow, reminder, proof of failure. He drew breath and chose different ones. "You are Emily Elizabeth Hall," he said. "You are my daughter. You are a kindness I didn't earn. You are stubborn and funny and braver than I have ever been. You are loved. You are loved. You are loved." Each repetition landed inside the room like a bell. The candle surged. Wax spilled over its lip in a slow, luminous tear. The mirror brightened until it seemed lit from behind. For the first time in years, the house smelled faintly of oranges, the perfume Elizabeth had worn on spring mornings. Grace was crying openly now. "My names," she said through a wet laugh. "I am Grace. I am not the girl who ran. I am the woman who stayed. I am the witness who refuses to be quiet. I am family, by choice if not by blood." A soft sound answered, like fabric sliding over wood. Around them, the covered mirrors in the adjoining hallways gave up their sheets. Cloth collapsed to the floor room by room, as if the house itself had decided to stop hiding from its faces. The quiet didn't vanish. It transformed. Where before it had been a vacuum, now it was a chamber tuned to their frequency. Every sentence hummed through it. Every confession rang. They read from journals. They read from letters. They spoke truths that had lived like splinters under skin. "Richard, I locked your mother's room because I couldn't bear the smell of her perfume without her. I let dust do the grieving I should have done. Grace, I loved this house the moment I saw it, and I hated myself for that, because I thought loving a beautiful place meant I betrayed the girl I used to be who slept cold and small. Emily, sometimes I made the drawings darker than they had to be because if I made them bright and you still didn't see, I was scared I'd disappear." With each admission, the temperature in the room shifted upward another degree, as if they were sitting closer to a heart they couldn't see. The candle no longer seemed necessary. Still, it burned faithful, its flame a metronome keeping time with 3 hearts. At some point, the chandelier clicked again. One of its bulbs pulsed once, though the switch remained off, and went still. Something above them acknowledged, not intruded, and then the house tested them. A sudden cracking noise snapped through the corridor, sharp and clean, the sound of glass splitting. Emily flinched. Richard stood. Grace looked to the doorway. But before fear could finish its old path, Richard spoke over it. "We're not stopping." He said it with such certainty that even the sound of breaking, that old language of dread, had to reconsider its purpose. Emily exhaled the breath she'd been holding. Grace nodded through tears. "Keep going," Grace urged. "Say the parts you never said for fear they break you." Richard's throat worked. He looked at his daughter and said the one thing he had held back for years because it seemed too late to matter. "I was angry with your mother for leaving me," he said. "I know she didn't choose it, but I was angry anyway. I was angrier at myself for being angry at her, and so I hid. I hid from you because you had her eyes, and when you looked at me, I saw that I had to love someone who could be taken from me. I thought if I loved less loudly, I might hurt less when life did what it does." Emily's face crumpled and smoothed in a single motion. "I thought if I spoke less loudly," she answered, "I would hurt you less while you were trying not to hurt. We were both trying to make pain smaller. It just made it quiet, and quiet made it big. Then let's make it loud, Richard said. They did. They read every line Elizabeth had written that sounded like prayer, and every line that sounded like fear. They spoke every little domestic shame. The missed recitals, the birthdays celebrated with gifts and no presents, the day Emily learned to tie her shoes with a housekeeper because her father was on a plane to Tokyo pretending that moving fast was the same as moving forward. The house did not fight back. It swayed around them like a ship rediscovering a rhythm that belonged to water, not storm. The candle was half its height now, pooled wax cooling in milky lips around its base. The mirror held steady. The air had warmed enough that Emily shrugged off her blanket and let it fall behind her chair. "We're almost there," Grace said, and she didn't know why she knew that, only that she did. "There's something we haven't said yet, a door we haven't knocked on." Emily turned slowly to her father. "Ask," she said. "Ask the thing you're most afraid of knowing." Richard's hands shook in his lap. He laced his fingers together to keep them from running. "What did she want?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "This presence. All this time. What did it want from us?" Emily faced the mirror again. Her reflection looked back, ringed with that faint drawing of dawn. After a moment, she answered, and though her mouth formed the words, a second tone braided with her own, older, sadder, like an echo returned after a long journey. "To be remembered," she said. "To be heard as a person, not feared as a shape. To have her name said in a warm room." "Isabella," Grace breathed, stepping closer to the mirror with the locket open in her palm. "Isabella Quartz. I remember you. I was a child who didn't know how to be brave for another child. I am trying now." The mirror brightened. No trick, no parlor flare. It took on a quality of depth that made the wall behind it seem farther away. The candle flame bent toward the glass. Richard rose. He did not offer himself in exchange anymore. The posture of sacrifice had been a kind of pride. Instead, he placed his palm against the mirror's cool surface, feeling the difference between his warmth and the house's slowly receding chill. "I am Richard," he said. "I am a husband who loved a woman I could not save. I am a father who loved a child I fear I did not see. I am a man who believed in profit and forgot to name grace. I am here. I am not leaving. I am listening." The glass beneath his hand warmed. Emily leaned her shoulder against him. Small but real, the way gravity is real. Grace joined them, one hand still holding the locket, the other slipping into Emily's. The triangle closed again, this time at the mirror. For a breath, nothing moved. Then the candle's flame stretched in like a string pulled taut and sang, not with sound, but with light, the smallest, sweetest note. It began at their hands. A pale illumination gathered where skin met skin, no glare, no spotlight. The sort of glow a person carries when they're called by name across a crowded room and turn to find the caller smiling. The light moved from palm to wrist, from wrist to arm, following a line of contact from father to daughter, from daughter to Grace, from Grace back into the oval of the locket, where Isabella's tiny photograph received it like a promise you keep whispering until it becomes true enough to soften a century. Emily drew breath as if she had been underwater and had finally found the surface. "She's not as angry," the girl said, surprise tilting her voice. "She's tired." "Yes," Grace whispered. "Me too." "Me 3," Richard said. And Emily laughed, small, shocked to hear that particular sound in this room at this hour. The house yielded. The wood stopped its complaint. The draft slowed to a simple temperature difference between this room and the next. Far upstairs a window latch clicked shut of its own accord, not menacingly, but like a house remembering how to tuck itself in. Emily spoke one more time to the mirror, to the room, to the thin place where memory turns into presence and back again. "You can rest," she said. "We will remember, not as a shape that frightens, as a girl who wanted someone to wait at the end of the hall." The mirror did not melt into visions. It did not spit out a wail. It reflected 3 living people and a candle burning clean. It reflected a locket and a photograph. It reflected a room that had enough names inside it to stop being a cave. Every ritual saves a breath for doubt. As if honoring that rule, the house offered one final protest. A sharp crack in the foyer, the distinct shiver of the long hall mirror splitting on a clean line. Emily startled. Grace stiffened. Richard turned his head toward the sound. He did not move his hand from the glass. "The house is allowed to break," he said calmly, astonishing himself again. "We are allowed to repair it. That's different from trying to pretend it was never cracked." Grace smiled, and the smile was new on her, lit from within like a lantern held by a traveler who finally recognizes the road home in the dark. "Then we are finished," she said softly, and perhaps that was how you knew a ritual had done its work. Not because something spectacular happened at the end, but because nothing needed to. They waited another minute, in the warm quiet. The candle offered its steady patience, until the wax deepened like a small lake around its base. When they finally stepped back, the room did not follow. It remained itself, steady, not looming. The mirror held what a mirror should, the moment you're in, and a gentle hint of the one you'd like to inhabit next. Richard picked up the journals and retied the twine, not to hide them, but to honor them. Tools, not relics. Grace closed the locket and fastened the chain at her neck, her fingers sure. Emily bent and pinched the candle wick between damp fingertips, snuffing the flame without a drop of wax spilled on the rug. In the dark that followed, they did not feel alone. When Richard turned on a single lamp, the room accepted the light without flinching. "Come on," he said, voice hoarse, tender. "Tea and toast, and sitting at a table like people who share a house." They moved through the hallway together. On the way, Richard paused at the long mirror that had cracked. The fissure ran true from top to bottom, clean, honest. He didn't cover it. He touched it with 2 fingers, the way you touch a scar that no longer aches, only insists on being remembered. In the kitchen, Grace filled a kettle. Emily hopped onto a stool and swung her feet. Richard took plates down from a high shelf like a man learning again which cabinet holds what. No one rushed. There was nothing to rush toward or away from. Time flowed at the speed of a human breath. Before they ate, Emily reached for both their hands. She looked from one face to the other, considering. "What is it?" Richard asked. "If it comes back," Emily said. And she didn't say it, didn't say the woman with no face, just like you say whether, something that returns on its schedule. "If it comes back, we won't go quiet again." "No," Richard said. "No," Grace echoed, and her no held a small laugh in it. Not mocking, not reckless, only relieved. No more quiet that hurts. They ate in companionable silence, the good kind. The house, given a new vocabulary, practiced it. The hum of the refrigerator, the kettle's breath, the polite sigh of the heating vent. Above them, the length of the hallway settled a fraction of an inch and stayed put. Later, as Richard walked Emily to her room, they passed a mirror by the stairs. It caught them side by side, a man who had stopped running and a child who had learned that speaking is a way of staying. For an instant, the glass offered them a gift, a faint, impossible glimmer around both their heads, like drawn halos smudged by loving thumbs. "Good night," he said, tucking Emily in. "Good night," she said back. "Dad." "Yes." "If I hear anything, can I say out loud right away?" "Yes," he said. "Please." "And if you hurt, can you say out loud right away?" He smiled, and this time the smile reached all the way into his eyes. "I'm learning," he said. "But yes, I can." He closed her door halfway, the way she liked it. Neither fully guarded nor fully exposed, a door that trusted the corridor. He stood a moment, listening to the house breathe like a creature that had finally been given a name. When he returned to the living room, Grace was there, turning the locket over in her fingers. She looked up. "It felt like a prayer," she said. "The kind that doesn't ask for anything. The kind that just tells the truth out loud." Richard nodded, and the house understood English after all. They both laughed quietly. It was not a laugh to ward off fear. It was a laugh to mark survival. Across the room, on the mantel, the mirror held them. Not a face with no name. 2 faces with names and a room with space enough for both. The ritual was finished. The night was not, Not entirely. But it had changed its mind about them. And that for now was enough. The house waited. Not in silence. Not anymore. The quiet had changed. It was no longer heavy, oppressive, suffocating. It was the kind of quiet you find in a church after the last hymn fades. Stillness full of breath. But at 3:23 a.m., the hour that haunted them again and again, the fragile peace broke. A sharp crack echoed down the corridor. The long hall mirror split, a black vein running from top to bottom. The chandelier rattled though no wind stirred. The temperature dropped in a rush that made Richard's breath bloom white in the dark. Grace rushed to Emily's room. The child was already awake, sitting upright in bed, her small body trembling. The blanket slid from her shoulders as she whispered, "She's here." Richard's stomach dropped, but Emily's eyes weren't wild. They weren't the eyes of someone trapped. They were the eyes of someone standing on the threshold of choice. Emily's voice was steady, though softer than before. She says if I let her in, if I stop fighting, then I won't feel anything anymore. No sadness, no fear, not even missing Mom. Her words stabbed Richard deeper than any apparition could. That was the promise. Numbness. Relief disguised as mercy. He knelt by her bed. And what about love, Emily? Would you feel that? Emily's lip trembled. She says love is just another kind of pain. No, Richard said, gripping her shoulders. Love is the only reason we're still here. Love is what pulled us through tonight. Pain is the shadow. Love is the fire that makes the shadows show up. Don't trade the fire for the dark. The chandelier above them flickered. A gust of wind, or something like it, swept through the room, rattling the window panes. The mirror across from the bed showed not just Emily, but a pale figure behind her, watching with hollow patience. Richard turned, facing the mirror directly. "Listen to me," he said, not to Emily, not to Grace, but to the reflection. His voice cracked, but did not falter. "I failed my wife. I failed my daughter. I turned my grief into stone and built a house with no doors. But tonight we tore them open. We name what you are, not a monster, not a curse, just a shape pain takes when it's ignored." The mirror quivered. The pale figure leaned closer, pressing ghostly hands against the glass as though testing the strength of its prison. Richard shouted now, his voice filling the room, making the walls shake. "You don't get to live here anymore. This house has names again. This family has a voice again. You can't drown us in silence. We're too loud for you now." Grace stepped forward, clutching the locket with Isabella's photograph. "And you, Isabella," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I abandoned you once. I left you alone at the end of that corridor. I carried that silence for years. But I will not abandon you again. I remember you. I see you. I name you." She held the locket up to the mirror. The photograph seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight, a face long lost but suddenly alive with recognition. "You wanted someone to wait for you at the end of the hall," Grace whispered. "I am here now. You don't need Emily. You don't need to keep haunting this house. You can rest in the truth." Emily slid off the bed, bare feet on the cold floor. She stood between Richard and Grace, her small hands in theirs, her gaze fixed on the mirror. "I am Emily Elizabeth Hall," she said, her voice carrying like a bell. "I am not a door. I am not your home. I am my father's daughter. I am Grace's family. And I am loved." The mirror groaned. The pale figure inside shuddered, its edges fraying, as if the words themselves tore the fabric of its being. Emily pressed on, louder now. "You can't have me. You can't have this house. You can't have my silence." The candle flame in Grace's hand surged until it was nearly blinding. The cracked mirror across the hall exploded outward in a rain of glittering shards, scattering like stars across the floor. The chandelier blazed alight though no switch had been touched. And then, from every mirror in the mansion, came a sound, the ringing of glass under strain. But instead of shattering outward, they fractured inward, collapsing into themselves until all that remained were empty frames. The pale figure dissolved with the glass, unraveling like smoke in a high wind. For a heartbeat, the entire house went black. No light, no sound, only the echo of their own breaths. Then the candle burned steady again, small and warm. Richard sank to the floor, pulling Emily against his chest. He kissed her hair, hot tears on his cheeks. Grace knelt beside them, one arm around them both. "It's over," Richard whispered. "It's finally over." But Emily shook her head. "Not over," she said softly. "Different. She's not gone. She's quiet, like a story that's finished being told." Grace nodded slowly. "And that's enough." For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel like a tomb. It felt hollow, but in the right way, like a space ready to be filled again with laughter, with footsteps, with the living. When morning came, the sun poured through the uncovered windows, golden and clean. Dust motes swirled in the beams of light, not ominous but ordinary. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Richard and Emily sat at the breakfast table. Grace joined them with 3 mugs, her locket resting against her chest. "Dad," Emily asked between bites of toast. "Yes." "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Richard looked at her, really looked without fear, without flinching. "If she does, then we'll listen. We won't hide. And we'll love louder than the silence. That's how we win." Emily smiled, small but certain. "Okay." Grace raised her mug. "To never being quiet again." They clinked mugs. The sound was light, human, alive. Outside, the old mansion groaned in its bones as the sunlight climbed its walls, but the groan no longer carried menace. It carried release, like a building learning to breathe again. In the end, the mansion did not lose its shadows. Every house has them. But Richard, Emily, and Grace learned what most families never dare, that shadows only grow in silence, and silence only grows when love forgets to speak. The house would always remember, but now, so would they? Out loud. Together.
This story reminds us that healing begins when we find the courage to speak. And, above all, to listen. Because sometimes, what hurts the most are not the screams, but the silence that suffocates. And now I want to hear from you. Which part of this story gave you the biggest chills or touched you the most? Share it down below in the comments. I'd love to read your thoughts. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss powerful stories like this one. Because every silence kept hidden always carries a voice asking to be heard. Not every silence is peace. Sometimes, it's a cry for help.